I think another reason for thinking that they are linked in the kind of way we suggested is we have been talking about the problems with the social gradient, the problems that are more common in the poorest areas of society. So they are the problems we know are related to class and status and hierarchy and all that sort of thing. And so we're not saying anything entirely new about them. We're just saying, okay, they are related to class and status. And if you make those status differences bigger, these problems get worse. They become more common. So we're not suggesting a quite different new causality. We're saying that the nature of the social gradient is the same as it's about relativities, it's about social position. Just two other reasons why I think that you can't argue that this all works the other way round. One is that, okay, supposing that income differences are allowed to widen because of a change in political or economic ideology. And I think that did happen in the 1980s when a number of countries' income differences widened and there was a monetarist economic theory became predominant. And a number of countries also weakened trade unions' negotiating power. So you might argue that, okay, there was a change in ideology which led to a change in income differences. Okay, but the governments that did that, that allowed that to happen, never intended or never foresaw that they would also lead to more obesity, more violence, more teenage births. Those were the consequences, unintended consequences of the actions they took, allowing the income differences to widen. So you can have an ideology that changes income differences or leads to political change, but it then has all sorts of unintended consequences on the social life of the society and the kind of social problems and how kids do at school, even things like bullying and so on at school, which are part of this picture. The last point is simply that we've shown some of the causal pathways. Kate talked about the monkeys taking drugs. We know that stress is important in health and accounting for the health differences. A number of the outcomes, I mentioned violence and disrespect and so on. You can see the causal processes. In some areas, some other areas, it's possible to demonstrate the causal processes by looking at troops of monkeys. You can, for instance, separate out the effects of social status from material factors by making sure animals get exactly the same food. They live in the same compounds. You can even manipulate social status. And you see that some of the stress effects of that go with low social status in non-human primates, macaque monkeys and so on, are similar to what are found in human beings. So we do know some of the details of the causality, as well as these other arguments thinking that the processes can't go the other way around. I think one of the really important things to understand about this is that with bigger income differences goes more status competition. And in a way that adds to the pressure to consume. Our consumer societies keeping up with each other. There's a number of bits of research that suggest that inequality increases the desire to consume because your goods, they say something about you. You know, the fear that second-class goods show you're a second-class person. That kind of thing gets more worrying in more unequal societies. And a bit of evidence for this, there are a number of bits of evidence, but one rather interesting one is that in more unequal societies, people work longer hours. So in the more equal European countries, Norway, the Netherlands, they work 14 or 1,500 hours a year. In the USA, Canada, more unequal countries, it's anything from 1,800 to 2,000 hours a year. Huge differences in the length of the working year. And I think that is a reflection of how important it is to have more money to keep up. It also, of course, feeds into environmental problems and so on. So the last point I want to make is that just how much income differences change over time. In many developed countries, there was a huge rise in the amount of inequality during the particularly the later 1980s. In the USA and Britain, a number of other countries saw these rises, and simultaneous growth of many of the social problems we've been talking about. This graph is simply what's been happening in Britain. These are the rises, very large rises in inequality under Thatcher in the later 1980s, early 90s, but then little or no change under subsequent governments. And so what we're experiencing now in our society are the long-term consequences of that rise in inequality, affecting teenage births, levels of violence, antisocial behavior, and the other problems that we've mentioned. But the point I think I should end with is really saying that all this data makes the same basic point, that it's the inequalities, it's the differences between us that matter. It's not the average standards of living anymore, but where we are in relation to each other. Instead of thinking about raising the material standards, thinking about the material environment, we must be thinking about the social environment. And the key thing to remember there is that the determinant, if you like, of the social environment is the inequalities between us. And that means that we suddenly have a policy handle, if you like, on the psychosocial well-being of the whole society. We can make life qualitatively better for all of us by narrowing income differences. Thank you.